This is a continuation of Chapter 18, the three Dharma seals, taken from The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. We'll continue from where we left off. The last sentence I said was, the best way to do this is by putting these teachings into practice in our daily lives. Experience always goes beyond ideas. And we'll go forward from here. 10th century Vietnamese master Tien Huy told his students, "Be diligent in order to attain the state of no birth and no death." One student asked, "Where can we touch the world of no birth and no death?" And he responded, "Right here in the world of birth and death." To touch the water, you have to touch the waves. If you touch birth and death deeply, you touch the world of no birth and no death. Impermanence, non-self, interdependent co-arising, and the middle way are all keys to open the door of reality. There is no point in leaving them in your pocket. You have to use them. When you understand impermanence and non-self, you are already free of much suffering and in touch with nirvana, the Dharma seal, the third Dharma seal. Nirvana is not something to look for in the future. As a Dharma seal, it is present in every one of the Buddha's teachings. The nirvana nature of the candle, the table, and the flower are revealed in the teachings, just as their impermanent and non-self nature are. Imagine a meeting in which everyone is stating his own opinions and disagreeing with everyone else's. After the meeting is over, you are exhausted by all these ideas and discussions. You open the door and go out into the garden, where the air is fresh, the birds are singing, and the wind is whistling in the trees. Life out here is quite different from the meeting with its words and anger. In the garden, there are still sounds and images, but they are refreshing and healing. Nirvana is not the absence of life. Drishtara Dharma, nirvana, means nirvana in this very life. Nirvana means pacifying, silencing, or extinguishing the fire of suffering. Nirvana teaches that we already are what we want to become. We don't have to run after anything anymore. We only need to return to ourselves and touch our true nature. When we do, we have real peace and joy. A little poem is quoted here. This morning I wake up and discover that I've been using the sutras as my pillow. I hear the excited buzzing of the diligent bees, preparing to rebuild the universe. Dear ones, the work of rebuilding may take thousands of lifetimes, but it has already been completed just that long ago. And that was taken from Thich Nhat Hanh's Butterflies Over the Golden Mustard Fields in the book Call Me by My True Name. In the Sutra of 42 chapters, the Buddha says, "My practice is non-action, non-practice, and non-realization." It means that what we seek does not lie outside of ourselves. Any teaching that does not bear the mark of the three Dharma seals, the four holy truths, and the noble eightfold path is not authentically Buddhist. But sometimes only two Dharma seals are taught, suffering and nirvana. Sometimes four Dharma seals are taught, impermanence, non-self, nirvana, and suffering. But suffering is not a basic element of existence. It is a feeling. When we insist on something that is impermanent and without self being permanent and having a self, we suffer. The Buddha taught us that when suffering is present, we have to identify it, and take the necessary steps to transform it. He did not teach that suffering is always present. In Mahayana Buddhism, there is also the teaching of one Dharma seal, the seal of the true mark. The teachings of 1, 2, and 4 Dharma seals were all introduced after the Buddha passed away. We practice the 3 Dharma seals to realize liberation. If you memorize a 5,000-page book on the 3 Dharma seals, but do not apply the teachings during your daily life, that book is of no use. Only by using your intelligence and putting the teachings into practice can they bring you happiness. Please base your practice on your own life and your own experiences, your successes and your failures. The Buddha's teachings are jewels, but we have to dig deep in order to touch them fully. There are other criteria that can help us navigate the sutras and determine whether a teaching represents a correct understanding of the Dharma. These include the 2 reverences, the 4 standards of truth, and the 4 reliances. The first of the 2 relevances is relevance to the essence. The essence is the 3 Dharma seals. If someone teaches the Dharma, what he or she says must be in accord with the Buddha's teachings on impermanence, non-self, and nirvana. When you understand the 3 Dharma seals deeply, you will bring them into every situation of your daily life. The second relevance is relevance to the circumstance. When someone shares the Dharma, what she says must fit the situation and the mentality of those she is addressing so that the teaching is appropriate. If it is not appropriate, it is not the true Dharma, even if it sounds like the Dharma. She mustn't just repeat some words of the Buddha. If she acts like a tape player and just pops in a cassette, that is not speaking in accord with the relevance to the circumstance. She must ask, to whom am I speaking? On what stage is their life set? What are their beliefs, concerns, and aspirations? Looking deeply this way will bring love and compassion into whatever she says. One cannot offer the right medicine without knowing the patient's illness. When you are in a Dharma discussion, each word you say should be relevant to the essence and to the circumstance. Please speak in accord with the teachings of impermanence, non-self, and nirvana, and speak directly to those present, taking into account their experience, their knowledge, and their insight. There may be things you consider important, but cannot say to this particular group. The 2 relevances require you to speak with skillfulness, tolerance, and care. The 4 standards of truth, Siddhanta, are another guide to help us understand the Buddha's teachings. The first standard is the worldly. The teaching is offered in the language of the world, so that those in the world will be able to understand. We have to take into account the contemporary cosmologies, arts, philosophies, metaphysics, and so forth, and deal with them. For example, we call the days of the week Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. We divide time into days, months, and years to express truth relatively for our convenience. When the Buddha tells us he was born in Lumbini, it is in accord with the first standard. The second standard is the person. We must remember as we read the Buddha's discourses that his words varied according to the needs and aspirations of his listeners. When the Buddha taught, he was deeply aware of the particular assembly, and what he said was specifically addressed to them. The third standard is healing. When the Buddha spoke, It was always to cure the particular illness of those he was addressing. Everyone has some illness that needs to be healed. When you speak to express healing, what you say will always be helpful. The fourth standard is the absolute. The Buddha expressed absolute truth directly and unequivocally. He said there is no self even when people did not believe or agree with him. He said it because he knew it was true. 15th century explorers said the world was round, even when the community threatened to imprison them for saying so. We can use these four standards of truth to understand the sutras as we read them. The third list to help us study the Dharma is called the Four Reliances. It was formulated by later teachers, not by the Buddha. The first reliance is that we should rely on the teaching and not the person. It means we can learn even from a teacher who does not practice everything he teaches. My 5th grade teacher, Miss Lien, often wore high-heeled shoes. One day, she wrote on the blackboard, "Never wear high-heeled shoes. You might twist your ankle." I couldn't understand why she did not apply that teaching to herself. Another teacher, who was a heavy smoker, taught us about the health hazards of smoking, even 60 years ago. The class laughed, and he replied, "Do as I say, not as I do." Later, when I attended the Institute of Buddhist Studies, we were told that if a precious jewel is in a garbage can, you have to dirty your hands. Remember the monk who had memorized all the sutras? He was not an easy person or a good practitioner, but the other monks had to put up with him and encourage him to recite the sutras so they could write them down. To me, the relationship between a teacher and a student is based on the trust that the teacher has practiced and continues to practice what he teaches. This is teaching by example, by the way we live. Perhaps the ancestral teachers thought it was so rare to find someone who could teach by his or her life's example that if we just wait for someone like that to come along, we might miss the chance to benefit from the teachings that are available now. The second reliance is to rely only on discourses where the Buddha taught in terms of absolute truth and not on those whose means are relative truth. I feel uneasy about this standard also, because it does not show us how the discourses that explain by means of absolute truth are related to those that explain by means of relative truth. In fact, sutras that teach absolute truth can be better understood in the light of sutras that teach relative truth. We should not think that discourses about practical matters like the 5 mindfulness trainings are not worthy of our attention, and that we only should study the Avatamsaka and the Lotus Sutras. We need to know how to go from down-to-earth sutras to less down-to-earth sutras. When we train ourselves in understanding the most basic discourses, we will be able to grasp more easily those that are more esoteric. The third reliance is that we should rely on the meaning and not on the words. When we have an overall view of the way the Buddha teaches and understand the context and circumstances of a particular teaching, we will not extrapolate inappropriately or use the Buddha's words out of context. Then, when there is an error due to inaccurate transmission, we can rectify it by ourselves. The fourth reliance is that we should rely on the insight of looking deeply, jnana, rather than on differentiation and discrimination, vijnana. However, it is important to be able to discriminate when we are reading the sutras so that we know according to which of the 4 standards of truth the Buddha is teaching. We can rely on discriminate as well as non-discriminate wisdom. The teachings of the two truths, 3 dharmas, 2 relevances, 4 standards of truth, and 3 doors of liberation are important guides to help us understand the language the Buddha used when he taught. Without understanding the Buddha's language, we cannot understand the Buddha. And that is the end of Chapter 18.